Greetings, science fiction and fantasy enthusiasts. Do you read books? Do you watch films? Do you hate deodorant? Then welcome to our podcast. You're listening to No Deodorant in Outer Space with Ryan Sean O'Reilly. Now, let's get started.
Getting an education was a bit like a communicable sexual disease. It made you unsuitable for a lot of jobs, and then you had the urge to pass it on. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to another tantalizing edition of No Deodorant in Outer Space. My name is Ryan Sean O'Reilly, and I'll be shepherding us through the various colors of the light spectrum as we search for the ever-elusive octarine, a sort of greenish-purple-yellow color, visible only to wizards and cats. Accompanying me on this journey, I've got our old friend and pal, Richard Mell.
Hello there. This is Rick Mell.
Rick.
Glad to join everyone once again.
Yeah, it's been a while. How are you?
I've been doing fine. There's been a few changes, I suppose, since we last did our podcast, like 2 years ago?
Yeah, it's been a while.
So, yeah, doing okay. I'm out in Oregon. I'm not in Chicago.
Yeah. You're on another coast.
Yeah.
Instead of the
middle coast, I'm on the left coast.
The middle coast. Well, we have Lake Michigan here in Chicago, so that is a coast of sorts.
It's the middle coast.
Yeah. And so now you're out west in a totally different time zone, and you started a new job, and you took the whole family, moved out there, and you've been there for a couple months now, right?
Since late May. Started my job on June 4th. I work as a construction manager / quality control, quality assurance manager. And I love that line of work. I've done it for probably a total of 5 years within my career, and I think this is kind of where I want to settle in.
Sounds like a lot of numbers.
A lot of numbers. I only gave you one number there, Ryan.
I mean, your job sounds like it involves a lot of numbers.
No, it actually involves more subjective angling in on certain values and deficiencies within construction. You try and pick your battles, and you play a kind of a political game almost to have some influence. But yeah.
All right. Thanks for that update. Joining us,
we have
another guest. A special guest who has not previously been on the podcast before, but she is all too familiar with the podcast and all the nonsense that came with it. And she got to hear you and I talk about it until we were blue in the face and red in the nose.
And you fell asleep on my couch.
And I fell asleep on your couch. That would be Heather Mell, that angel voice talking to us.
Yes.
Rick's wife.
Yes. I have also had the same recent changes that Rick has had, so...
Oh, that's good.
We can skip that part. Yes.
That's good. Heather, just to acclimate our audience to you, what can you tell us about your own interests in science fiction, fantasy, or horror books or movies? Like any books or movies or anything that have spoken to you over the years or that you've read or watched?
No, none that have really spoken to me. No. I read the standard books. You told me to say Harry Potter, so I have that.
You've read all the Harry Potters, correct?
Oh, yes, of course.
Now, Rick was kind of commenting, have you read them more than once?
Yes, I read many books more than once.
Okay, so that's good.
I have read them a few times.
And there's not something to be embarrassed of, especially on a show like this.
Well, I prefer real ghost stories. That's my interest in science and fiction and fantasy. I like to hear real ghost stories.
Oh, like horror stories. Okay. Is there any horror stories that you particularly liked, or movies or anything?
No, like when people think they see ghosts.
Real stories.
Real stories, yes. I'm fascinated by that.
Once upon a time when we had cable, we used to watch the documentaries about, people seeing ghosts and the ghost hunters and the real Ghostbusters and, just a lot of BS, basically, I think. But
yes, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're sort of a horror fan. Do you like Stephen King, Heather?
I've only read one Stephen King that I did not enjoy.
Really? Which one did
Well,
you
I
read?
didn't, but maybe I was just too young for it. It was Gerald's Game,
Okay.
and I did not appreciate it. But there could be a few more that I would be interested in.
Well, so, Heather, the only Stephen King book you didn't really like was Gerald's Game, but you don't know that could have just been a fluke, or you might have not been in the right frame of mind.
Well, I remember enough that wasn't a fluke. I don't like that book, and I'll never read it again. However, you guys did a Stephen King.
Carrie?
Yeah, maybe that one.
And Running Man.
Oh, I don't know about that. But there might be a couple. Like, I don't know which ones. Maybe Pet Sematary, or I don't know. I'm not sure. But
Okay.
I possibly would be interested in trying another one someday.
Okay. And you've also read other Discworld books, right? You both have.
Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Heather's
That-
read several.
Which ones have you read, Heather?
Well, the first three, I believe, in the list.
So that's like The Color Magic, The Light Fantastic, and then I don't know what the third one is.
There's Witches, there's The Truth, there's Interesting Times, Pyramids.
Okay.
Yeah, several of them, actually.
So you've liked visiting Discworld.
Yes, I did get into visiting Discworld. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's lucky for us, because in this episode, we're going to be discussing a Discworld book.
Are we?
We are.
Oh.
Ryan, you haven't told us about yourself. Well, I'm sure you've been updating through these recordings, but have you been reading any other books outside the podcast?
Yes, I do try to sneak in books in between books for the podcast. Mostly they've been genre books, but they've been other authors that I wanted to check out.
Doesn't every book lie in some genre?
Yeah, but they're mostly been like science fiction, fantasy, or horror books.
So that genre, okay.
Yeah, those genres, yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah. I've read some good ones, and...
That's good.
Yeah.
I reread through the entire Dune series. After we had done our last podcast on the first Dune book, I continued with the subsequent four, and I got to tell you, they only get better and better.
With the rereads.
With the reread. And even
Cool.
as you go on and progress all the way to Chapter House, it just becomes more amazing as you go through it.
Cool.
And especially after, you've read it for the first time, you wait, 15, 20 years, you get older, more mature, and you just bring a fresh perspective to everything, and it's well worth it.
So you're doubling down on your recommendation to read Dune.
Oh, triple down, man.
Tripling down, yeah. Well, yeah, it was good. I enjoyed rereading it, and I didn't go on to read the rest of them again, but that's good. Those are books that are worth rereading. I'm sure you can pick up something new every time, is basically what you're saying.
Well, yeah, of course you pick up new details every time, but
Yeah.
The most important thing is you just grasp the intent a little bit more. There are mature themes going on, which you may not completely have a grip on, in your early 20s, where you would have more of a full grip on, in your late 30s.
Cool. Heather, have you read any of the Dune books? Or did you try?
Yes, he made me read...
I didn't make you. Read this, woman.
Well, he wanted me to read all five. I couldn't make it. through all five.
She stopped at God Emperor. That's when Leto 2 turned into a worm.
It gets pretty crazy. That one gets pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe that's the fourth one.
That is
I don't think I made it to the fourth one.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway.
those are good books, and we're about to talk about another book that I think is good.
Oh, what's that book?
Hogfather
Oh, no.
Oh.
by Terry Pratchett, and the corresponding BBC adaptation, Hogfather, which was directed by Vadim Jean.
Oh.
Right?
I don't know.
Sounds right, yeah.
Yes,
like a French
that is
last name.
you are correct.
Yes. So let's go around the horn and give our opening comments. Like if everyone could just kind of sum up their
Quick
thoughts.
sentence, short
Just a quick-
statement.
That's right. You know the drill, Rick. And from last time, just a one-sentence summary of your thoughts on the book to kind of set us up for the episode this evening. Do you want to start us off, Rick?
Sure. Reading Hogfather was like being on a wild and crazy sleigh ride through this sort of kaleidoscopic netherland of Discworld. I mean, yes, that's all.
Okay.
I'll stop there.
All right. Heather, do you want to give us a little quick preview of your thoughts?
Well, having read more than the both of you put together of his books, I
Very
would
true.
say it was very typical.
Oh.
Yes.
Ah. Okay.
Yes.
And I will say for myself that this was a densely wrapped satire cleverly tucked in around a holiday plot loaf of good cheer
Oh, my
and
God.
baked with a robust premise, which is both refreshingly
loaf.
poignant and wildly genius. It's an important Hogs watch on the disc this season. Mind the bells, gling-a-ling-a-ling.
What kind of loaf?
It's a plot loaf.
A plot loaf. Does that sound tasty?
I think I made that for dinner.
Is that like Lodestar? What is that?
That's what you eat on Hogs Watch. A big plot loaf.
How many days did it take you to come up with that?
5 seconds.
Not more than one.
Did you
All
do that
right.
at work? You did that at work.
No. I did it.
Oh.
I
did it on the
put some
toilet.
thought into it.
His iPhone in his toilet.
I put some thought into it. And okay, so this book was written by Sir Terry Pratchett, Sir Terence David John Pratchett, which is his legal name. So let's go into the bio portion, and to do that, I'm gonna crack open a Guinness here
Oh, yeah.
in honor of Sir Pratchett. As I saw a picture of him on Wikipedia drinking one as he got an honorary degree from the University of Dublin.
Ah.
And I managed to spill on myself.
So,
here.
Ryan, do you have anything, any new insights on the life, the illustrious life of Terry Pratchett?
I do. Can you hang on 1 second, though?
No.
I just totally spilled on myself. Hold on.
Clean that up.
This book was written by Sir Terence Pratchett, who was born April 28, 1948. He died, actually, March 12, 2015. He was age 66. Rick, you actually wrote a tribute to him in a previous episode. I think it was actually attached to the preview of our episode. I think it was Season 2, Preview 2. You did a really good job of kind of doing a touching tribute to him because we had recorded... We covered him twice on this podcast. Once we did The Color of Magic, and another time we did Going Postal. The second season we did Color of Magic, and I think after we recorded it, he had died, so we did that tribute. So that was good. We covered him previously in those two episodes, so I'm not going to rehash what we already talked about on those other episodes. Like, I think particularly in the second one, in The Color of Magic, you covered his early life in pretty good detail about his journalism and his early publications, and it was nice, so people can go back and listen to that. I kind of focused a little bit more on some different stuff in my research for this episode, and a little bit more on his later life. First thing I'd like to say about Pratchett is I really think the man was a true genius. I thought he was very whimsical, had a very clever nature about him, which is very apparent in his writings. He was an only child, and a lot of times his characters typically didn't have siblings, which I think one of the main characters here, Susan, also was an only child. As we covered in our previous episode, he did journalism early on in his career, and later he did public relations in the nuclear industry during Chernobyl and these various catastrophes. But before he was doing that, and when he was just doing regular journalism, he went on a lot of beats and routes, and he saw humanity for what it was. It taught him a lot about people and how they behave, and he kind of came to the conclusion that nobody is really normal. He also saw a lot of suicides and deaths and stuff, but it was invaluable research that helped inform his later career as a writer.
I would think just being a spin doctor for the nuclear industry kind of helped him gain perspective on
that too.
Yeah, a lot of things there.
Yeah, and especially during those troubled times that he was doing it. He went off to write the Discworld books, and he started off the Discworld series with The Color of Magic, which was really just a response to the derivative work that was coming out of the success from Tolkien. He was a fan of Tolkien, but he kind of saw it, and a lot of other authors saw this, is that people were trying to imitate Tolkien, and then they were trying to imitate the imitators of Tolkien. And the publishers were all trying to cash in on this. So his first books in Discworld were very much a parody of that.
So he made fun of the imitators of Tolkien.
Yeah, essentially.
He did, yes.
Yeah, but his unique take on it, because he didn't get washed out in that whole movement. He ended up kind of setting himself apart and lasting for a long time, obviously, because he wrote 41 Discworld books among the other stuff he wrote. And Discworld he looked at as a sort of Lord of the Rings 500 years later. After all the battles and all that, and at this point, the trolls and the orcs and the goblins have all decided to move into the city and get jobs. So it's kind of like a medieval kind of world, although it goes through different iterations and time periods, but with like modern sensibilities and jumbles it all together. And it was very much a parody in the beginning, and then it kind of evolved. He took fantasy very seriously, which is why he thought his writing was actually funny. He wasn't just making fun of the genre, he was serious about it, and he liked the genres, and I think that helped inform his humor. Well, another thing I noted about him is that he was an early adopter of technology, of computers, and according to Wikipedia, he had like a Sinclair ZX81.
Wow.
And he then had an Amstrad CBC 464.
Oh, that was a 5-bit.
And that was his first writing computer. Eventually moved on to PCs, and at the end, I think he was using a PC with 6 flat screens.
He was a PC guy, not a Mac guy.
That's my understanding.
It's unbelievable.
But I saw in the various videos and documentaries, he'd have like 6 screens open up with, emails and writing and all kinds of stuff. But he always embraced.
He died at an early age.
No, he was very healthy, and he said he wasn't like a big drinker and stuff, even though I saw a picture of him drinking a Guinness. And one of the comments he said was that, like, he wanted to almost tell people, like, yeah, you can do all this healthy stuff, but in the end, it might not even matter. You can still get something, despite how healthy you are. I mean, he looked pretty trim and pretty fit from what I saw.
Like radiation from blue screens all the time.
That could be.
Yeah.
He also was one of the first authors to get involved with the internet. He communicated with fans on Usenet as early as 1992. He was also pretty big on fan mail until it became overwhelming. And one of the reasons for that was that he wrote a fan letter to J.R.R. Tolkien, and he got a response. He said it was typewritten, and he wasn't sure that Tolkien actually wrote it. It might have been a form letter, but nonetheless, he got a response, and he really appreciated that. So he made a lot of effort to do that for his fans for as long as he could, until email came around and he really started getting overwhelmed with it. But his fans were important to him, and he was always kind of respecting that. He was also a video game player, and he was known for playing Tomb Raider, Half-Life 2, another one called Thief, and he also worked on mods for the games Oblivion and Skyrim. The Color of Magic became a video game in 1986, and then I think a touchscreen game later in 2006. There was also various other Discworld games, and I saw that fans made a text-based Discworld multi-user dungeon game. I tried to check it out. I didn't really have time, but I was able to log in. It still exists.
What was that game that was all text-based? Wasn't it called Dork or something? Or
it was just called Discworld.
No,
Discworld.
The original text-based game. It had a single name. Jeez, I forgot.
Oh,
it was probably Dork.
Zork.
Zork.
Yeah, Zork. Zork, right? Isn't it Zork? Isn't
something like that? Yeah.
I think that I know what you're talking about. It's something like that. And one of the characters in his Discworld was actually a computer called Hex, who makes an appearance in The Hogfather. So we'll get into that when we talk about the book. He resisted adopting his books into films for a long time. He had some quotes about this, and one of them was saying that he didn't think it could be done real well unless it was done by William Goldman, who was the author of The Princess Bride, and wrote the screenplay for The Stepford Wives, among others. So he was just really resistant for that. And he said that filmmakers would continuously come to him and make offers to turn his stuff into films. And they would come and say, hey, we're going to turn your books into movies and we're going to make you rich. And he would have to point out to them that he was actually already rich. And he would say, yes, but can you make me happy? So he wasn't really interested in getting rich off of movies because he was pretty wealthy from his books alone. And so it was just important to him that it was done right. And he was also worried about losing merchandising rights because a lot of times, I think almost all the time now, especially after Star Wars, which Will talked about in a previous episode, is that film companies, they want the merchandising right. And then he thought he would lose control of his characters, and that he didn't think he would be happy with that. So he was real precious about that. I think the earliest iterations of visual works of his books were 2 animation efforts. Hogfather, incidentally, was the first film like a live action film that was made of one of his books.
That's surprising. I thought that they commercialized Hogfather. The story got commercialized. It was a commercialized version of the book. I was kind of disappointed, but we'll get into that.
We'll get into that when we talk about the film. I know that they're gonna do Good Omens, which he collaborated with Neil Gaiman. I think that they're making a miniseries out of that that's going to come out
You got to mention Gaiman.
Well, he co-wrote that book with him. Actually, another story about his film days is that he had Sam Raimi, who I think wrote those Spider-Man movies a while back. He was working on a script for, I think, Good Omens and maybe the We Free Men, but Pratchett didn't like it. He thought it was too Disney-fied. He thought the script was pretty decent, but he saw what the studio was trying to do to it, and so he pulled it back and said, "No, you can't do it." So this Hogfather became the first one.
The stickler.
But he was kind of big on putting out good products. I saw that there's a cutout book of the Unseen University you can buy, where you take this cardstock paper and you can construct a 3D replication of the Unseen University and other buildings. It must have been on a limited run, because now if you want to buy one, it was over $100.
You should buy one, right?
I thought about it until I saw the price. It's
probably worth it.
He came out with an illustrated screenplay for the Hogfather thing. He didn't have maps for Discworld for a while, and then eventually he worked with some illustrators to create maps of Discworld. And for this movie, he released a 2-disc edition of it, which had numbered signed cards that he himself signed when it came out. Moving on from all that, Pratchett himself, I was looking kind of more, like I said, more his end life and who he was as a person. And one of the things, and Rick, you mentioned this on one of the previous episodes, is that Pratchett was a humanist. He didn't really believe in a god or anything like that, but he was a humanist. And I was kind of trying to understand humanism, and I looked in Wikipedia, and the definition that they give in Wikipedia is that humanism is a philosophical and ethical stance that emphasizes the value and agency of human beings individually and collectively, and generally prefers critical thinking and evidence, rationalism and empiricism over acceptance of dogma or superstition. I think the definition probably changes over time depending on who adopts it and stuff like that. But he also said in a quote, in an interview I heard him talking, saying he believed in an ordered structure from which everything flows, but not necessarily in anyone who could have put that in his head.
An orange structure?
An ordered structure from which everything flows. Yeah. At one point, he heard a memory of his father talking in his head, but he attributed that to an engram and said that maybe that's where gods come from.
An engram?
Yeah, it's a perception of your brain. I'm not sure that science agrees or consistently on what that, if that really exists or not. But essentially, he doesn't believe that it came from, outside of him. Even though he heard his father talking. But he has a great quote in The Hogfather that he also has said in interviews that kind of sums up his belief system. He said he believes in the place where falling angels meet the rising ape. And I kind of really liked that imagery.
Oh, what does that mean to you, Ryan?
Well, you have a mix of myth and gods, and you also have Darwinism with the ape.
Sure.
And that nexus in between.
I see.
It's
that makes sense with the statements he's made in this book, Hogfather. So
yeah. He put that line in The Hogfather, but he's also said it in interviews to explain himself. I don't know, I just like that one.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, later in his life, like we mentioned before, he was diagnosed with what he referred to it as the embuggerance. And the embuggerance was a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's disease. He was diagnosed in December of 2007 after being misdiagnosed with a minor stroke in August of that year. He had sort of a rare variant of the disease called PCA, posterior cortical atrophy, which causes the back of the brain to shrink and shrivel. I think he was not quite 60 when he got this diagnosis, so it was pretty early in his life, and we know he died when he was 66.
So he had the shrinking brain for 6 years.
In the back. This disease affects more your visuals rather than your cognitive function.
Right. And I think it would be more of a physical impairment than sort of a cognitive impairment. Yeah.
Yeah, especially initially.
Right.
But I think it ends up the same as Alzheimer's. It's different than Alzheimer's, regular Alzheimer's or whatever, but goes towards the same end. And I think most Alzheimer's patients don't actually die of Alzheimer's. They die of other stuff, but it speeds things up as far as your demise. So, yeah. He noticed he was having problems writing and spelling and stuff, and he bought a different keyboard and then eventually, they figured out what was wrong. But he went on to keep writing, and when it got too difficult, he had speech recognition software, and also his personal assistant would help him write his books. when he would go and give talks, I actually saw some video where, like, you know, he had trouble reading, and he eventually couldn't do personal dedications in the book signings and stuff. But he was a very much sort of like a workaholic. He was very industrious, and he kept going for as long as he could until, you know, he just physically couldn't. When he got the diagnosis, he wanted to make the disease sorry that it went after him. And he kind of went on this public campaign, went on various interviews. He did a 2-part documentary for the BBC that came out in 2009 called Terry Pratchett, Living with Alzheimer's. It won a BAFTA award. He also pledged $1 million to the Alzheimer's Research Trust. He had a lot of people coming up to him, talking to him, kind of, I think, thanking him for going public and talking about their own experiences. At some point, he said that people also started talking to him about death and also about assisted suicide. He started to talk about that publicly. He didn't particularly like the term assisted suicide. He preferred assisted death. And he thought that people should have a right to have a peaceful death of their own choosing. He didn't like the term suicide because of what he saw as a journalist. He saw real, you know, suicides, and he said it wasn't pretty. And so he didn't like that term associated with it.
Maybe some of the people that he saw during journalism just didn't have the money for euthanasia like
right.
He was preparing for, right?
Right. You know, he didn't actually do assisted death. I think he died of natural causes.
He was planning on it.
He was considering it.
Dabbling.
He was considering it, and he wanted to explore it, and he was open to it. He thought people should be able to, and sort of campaigned for it. He remembered a time when people wouldn't even talk about cancer. Like, they wouldn't name cancer. They would just call it the long death when he was a reporter. That's why he wanted to go public with it, because he said, his quote was, you know, if you want to slay the demon, you have to name the demon first. He didn't want to be afraid to talk about it. In 2010, he gave a BBC Richard Dimbley lecture about assisted death. It was called Shaking Hands with Death. So Richard Dimbley, I looked up about this guy who this lecture is based off, and he was a journalist who died of cancer. I think actually of testicular cancer, but like a couple weeks before he died, he went public with a documentary about the effects of smoking tobacco and lung cancer and the connection. And this came out like 1965.
All right, pay attention, Heather.
That's right.
I disagree.
Heather, get a little closer to the mic.
I disagree.
I don't think you could disagree with that, but when he did this lecture about assisted death, he did talk himself, but he couldn't read his full lecture because at this point his disease was progressed. His friend, Sir Tony Robinson, who was an actor and activist for dementia,
Knight.
He actually read it. It's really good. You can watch it on YouTube. That guy's known for his role as Baldric in Blackadder, which was a Rowan Atkins effort.
That guy.
And that guy also played a couple roles in Hogfather. He was Vernon Crumley in The Bed Monster. In 2011, he made another documentary called Terry Pratchett, Choosing to Die, which also won a BAFTA award, and that was all about assisted death. And he goes with these people, and they actually show one of the assisted deaths happening. It's pretty moving, pretty intense to watch. But he also kind of explored, like, in there, like, the various, like, controversial treatments and stuff people can do and stuff. And I don't know, he since he was considering it for himself, he wasn't just like an outside journalist looking at this. It was very touching what he did, and he did it with a lot of respect.
So what is the documentary called again, Ryan?
Terry Pratchett, Choosing to Die.
Okay.
And that's just like a one-episode thing. He was knighted in 2009 for his services to literature. He received an OBE previous to that in 1998. And when he was doing his lecture on assisted death, he made a joke, because we talked about in the previous episode that he actually made his own sword, and he made a joke on that lecture about not, even though he was a knight, he wasn't able to carry a sword around because of times being what they were, and it was actually pretty funny. Another little side note, Death, who is one of the main characters in Hogfather, actually was one of the most popular characters in all the Discworld books. This is his 4th appearance in the Discworld books, although this is the 20th Discworld book. But fans were always talking to him how much they liked the character of Death. And Pratchett said he had a real like moment when fans would come up to him and say, "Oh, you know, our aunt is in hospice now. She's dying, and we've given her your Discworld books, and she absolutely loves them." And he said it really gave him pause and reflected on the impact of his writing. So considering the whole trajectory of his life, I just thought that was kind of interesting. Like I said, he didn't stop writing after his diagnosis. He kept going. He did it at least, I think, 5 more Discworld books. Unseen Academicals, I Shall Wear Midnight, Snuff, and Raising Steam. And the 5th one came out posthumously called Shepherd's Crown, although it was actually completed before he died. So he was a very industrious person. But eventually the disease, caught up with him. And, for a long while he thought his symptoms were mainly physical and not affecting his cognitive mind. But by July of 2014, he had to cancel an appearance for the biennial International Discworld Convention, which he attributed to his illness and other age-related issues. And then eventually he did expire. He had a humanist funeral, and his assistant, Rob Wilkins...
What would that consist of?
You know what? I didn't look into that. I don't know.
That's interesting.
He was married in church, though, I think. But, yeah, he had a humanist funeral.
Parental pressure, I'm sure.
But on his official Twitter account, his assistant, Rob Wilkins, tweeted, and I really loved his quote. So, on his death, his Twitter account said, "At last, Sir Terry, we must walk together." Terry took Death's arm and followed him through the doors and on to the black desert under the endless night. The end. And it all came out, I think, in the small capitals, which Death is known for speaking with in his books. So that was the final tweet that went out when he died. I don't know, I just like that.
The Black Desert.
Yeah. So that's what I have to say about Pratchett. To try to add to what we've already talked about in our previous episodes. I don't know if there's anything else you guys had to add to that or you wanted to say. Or
Jesus, no.
Heather just likes to read the books. Okay. We can move on to our next phase and kind of get into the book here. Let me just give a little summary of the Hogfather to set the tone here. The synopsis of the story is, a clandestine group conspires to take out a hit on the Hogfather, who in Discworld is the equivalent of Father Christmas. They do this by employing the Assassin's Guild, who assign this absurd task to their more psychotic and questionable apprentice named Tea-Time, which is spelled Tea-Time.
Tea-Timey.
Tea-Timey. That's how he pronounces it. So there's really only one way to suppress a mythic figure like this, and the method threatens to disrupt the Disc's entire fabric of belief systems. Death himself takes notice and elects to jump into the role of the famed gift giver in hopes of inspiring his human granddaughter, Susan, to investigate what's really going on so she can stop things before they go too far. That's kind of the summary. This book came out in 1996. It was published by Victor Gollancz. This, like I said, was the 20th Discworld book. It was the 4th one where Death appeared. I think there's a shift in tone in the Discworld books, and maybe Heather, you'll agree with this, but I saw a quote on Wikipedia from Publishers Weekly where they said about this book, they said, Pratchett used a darker than usual tone as well as edgier satire for Hogfather than usually, and concludes that he has now moved beyond the realm of humorous fantasy and should be recognized instead as one of the more significant contemporary English language satirists. I know, Rick, we read The Color of Magic, and I guess you have too, Heather, so I do think there's a big difference between reading The Color of Magic and this book. I think it is more satire than just like jokes and comedy. I mean, would you agree with that, Heather?
Satire is jokes and comedy, though.
Well, but it's like, well, I guess, what do you think, Heather?
I noticed that we did not laugh out loud as much.
You did?
However, his wit, I thought, was still there, but it was to a level where you could appreciate it. If you noticed it, you could appreciate it, I think.
Right. Yeah, he did. Go ahead, Heather.
I wasn't asking.
Ryan.
What?
Oh. No, go ahead, Rick.
Oh, well, I did notice him dabble in this more of a... He took a more of a philosophical angle on the power of myth and how it can relate to the human evolution, how it assists civilization, and he really tried to underscore that in this story, which is a little bit more of a serious topic than, some of the more frivolous books that he's written.
To me, this was similar to Going Postal.
I thought it was just as frivolous as any other book.
Yeah, it was frivolous for sure, but he did emphasize the power of mythology and how the imagination has something to do with a functioning society with virtues such as justice and fellowship. He called them big lies, okay? But in order to believe the big lies, you've got to believe the small lies first, which I don't necessarily agree with. I don't agree with the fact that he's saying that justice is a big lie. I think justice is something that an evolved species recognizes as something that should be real.
But I mean that is one of the best quotes ever. Is that conversation you're talking about at the end of the book when Death and Susan are talking and they have that exchange, and Susan says what you say, and she's like, yeah, you know, this is not the same thing as other stuff. And Death says, you know, you take the universe, grind it down to the finest power, and sieve it through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy. And yet, you know, people act as if there's some kind of ideal order in the world, and which the universe should be judged by. But I mean, it's kind of a point. These are intangible things.
Fair. It's not fair. He's taking, the physical reality of the universe, and he's trying to find the humanity from that. You're never going to find it.
But that's a good point, though, right? It's not a tangible thing. Like, why do we believe in these things when you, like, you know, we sort of all agree to do so as a society. Some of us don't, and then others, the majority, seem to have a problem with that. There is like a, you know, I mean, that's what society is, and Pratchett makes this really interesting, great point, saying like that's what it means to be human, is to agree to these things that aren't real. And so he's saying like that's the point of fantasy. That's why fantasy has value, because it helps us learn to accept things that we can't necessarily see and touch, and yet are very, 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 very important. You know, I mean, to me, it makes me think of. I mean, I try to write myself, and I try to write in these genres, and I think like, what is the point of writing this stuff as opposed to just writing like an encyclopedia or something of nonfiction? And it's like, well, storytelling is the point. And what's the point of storytelling? And I see it as like a way that humans organize themselves in the universe, in the world, in society. And that is a necessary function. You have to be able to organize where you fit in with all of this.
And reading this book was almost like being in a workshop of storytelling. I mean, he gets down to the rules of, myth making. And it's almost like, watching the sausage being made for being an author of fantasy and fiction. It was quite. It almost like took on this educational kind of tone to it almost.
Yeah, but it's not pedantic. Like, he doesn't hit you over the head with like the lessons.
Well, I think he does. I think he.
You think so?
Yeah, constantly. Yeah.
Heather, did you feel like that? You described it as what did you describe it as? Absurd or whimsical, or how did you describe it, Heather?
It's not absurd. There's a certain whimsical aspect to it, but
did you feel like he's really trying to learn, like teach you something?
No, I don't read as much into it, I don't think, as Rick does. So I take most of it on just a surface level, and I pick up little golden nuggets here and there, but no, I didn't feel like I was being taught a lesson. I was just listening to a story.
Well, I hope you guys both sleep in the same bed tonight still. No, I mean, there's not like one purpose to reading, right? I mean, two people can read the same book and get different things and different experiences from it, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right, and I never get the deeper meaning of things. That's my downfall.
I don't know that it's a downfall. I mean, if you both read the book and both enjoyed it, that's a positive experience for both of you. The book doesn't have to serve one function that needs to be discovered, right? It can have multiple facets and functions.
Right. It was enjoyable, and I'd read it again probably someday.
Rick, would you read it again?
No.
Well, he read it the first time. He read it out loud. I only listened.
I mean, that's how we got through the book. We read it to each other, right?
Romantic.
And reading this book out loud to someone else, and you've got an audience of one, it's quite difficult, right? I mean, he doesn't exactly use conventional semantics to demonstrate who is speaking, right? obviously death is never quoted. It's always these capital letters.
Small capitals. That's what he uses for death, and uses the plus symbols for hex
Right.
the computer. And
But
and
he
he doesn't
also-
use chapter breaks.
Right.
Right.
But he also has this, a dialogue shared by, more than maybe 3 characters at once, and he doesn't necessarily assign a line
Speech tags.
to
Speech tags, yeah.
a certain character. So
You're right.
It's almost like this Hemingway approach, but a little bit more complicated. So as you're reading aloud, you're just trying to decipher,
Yeah.
who's speaking, and
In real time. Yeah.
and reading, hex, I would never say plus to Heather. I would just speak in computer voice, and so I mean,
I wish I was there for that.
And then when I read death, I just have a little bit more of a hoarse voice, speak a little bit more slowly.
Nice. Well,
So-
sometimes it can be harder to decipher when you're being read something, and unless it's like professionally done and prepared for, and like because you're doing it in real time, like I
just
just
do it in
said,
real
so I can
time,
understand that. Yeah. All right. What about like Pratchett does a great thing of like sort of making a satire of like the way society functions, which we clearly saw in like Going Postal and with the clacks and the internal systems that make things go and how crazy they can be. The book starts off with, these people wanting to assassinate essentially Santa Claus, who's the Hogfather. We don't know who's doing it. Well, we know it's these people called the Auditors, and they're described as the civil servants of reality. They're like these ephemeral spirits. At the end, they take on the form of attack dogs, and they chase the early form of the Hogfather. What did you make of them? They're somehow subject to rules, just like death is, but like they hate humans. Well, Heather, like, what did you think of the Auditors?
I don't know, not a lot.
Well, did you buy the premise that someone wanted to assassinate Santa Claus, essentially, or did it strike you as interesting, or?
Well, it left me at the end wondering why. What is the point?
Yeah.
So no, that probably wasn't really answered.
Well, I felt like he was saying that these characters, the Auditors of Reality, which he doesn't really explain that much. I agree with you there. Is that it's just these outside forces that are trying to make things less
adhere to the
absurd.
laws of physics. Right?
Yeah. Like less absurd, and that humans are always messing up, so they hate humans. And oddly enough, Death is the opposite. He likes humans.
Yeah. To them, humans represent chaos.
Yeah.
The Auditors want to keep as much order in the universe as possible. They represent that rising ape, but not an ape that rises, an ape that is not even conceived. Right.
Yeah. They'd rather not have humans. Yeah.
Even the lowest life form is a little bit beyond their desire. Right.
Yeah. They're strange. They kind of pop in and out here and there. They're the sort of the villains, I guess. And they hire an assassin who turns out to be Tiataime,
Right.
who is this psycho killer that thinks nothing of killing people or animals, anything that's in his way of his craft, which he's a total craftsman, right? He loves being an assassin. When he's assigned the task to kill the Hogfather, he's already thought about it previously on how he would do such a thing. And it's absurd. It's like, I mean, you were talking about the fourth Dune book where Leto becomes a worm. It's sort of like that. Like, yeah, how do you kill Santa Claus?
Leto. It's
Leto.
The E before the O. The O gives power to the E.
Okay.
Leto.
Tiataime. So how does? I mean, it's fascinating to me. Like, yeah. So it's determined he can't really kill the Hogfather, but he can suppress him to the point where he's not existing anymore. Heather, did you?
Yes.
I think you said previously offline that you liked Tiataime. Was it that you, or was that Rick?
That was not me. No.
Did I say I liked Tiataime?
I thought one of you did.
I thought he was the most entertaining, just because of the element of surprise and the chaos he brought. Obviously, you could read the tone in the book that he always sort of kept this levity in his dialogue with the other characters, and then a split second later, he would have the character adjacent to him killed. He would murder him. So it was just completely unpredictable, and it kind of kept you on the edge of your seat. He had boyish qualities. He probably represented England's finest, most educated, yet most sort of deranged class of citizenry. Which, you can imagine would exist given all of the contradictions within merry old England. I mean, you have a stratification of classes. You have, it's the place where the rich are extremely rich and the poor are very poor. And if you're caught in between, you probably end up going crazy. And that's Tiyotami.
Does he respect death, the character death, the personification of death?
I guess.
I don't think he
sort of.
respects anything.
I don't think he respected anything.
Heather, you don't
really.
think so? Why not? Heather, why not?
Just his general attitude. And it's
that anti-authoritarian
he thinks he's
outlook.
better than everything.
I don't
He
think
does.
he's...
Well, Heather,
maybe,
let Heather talk.
Go ahead.
What do you mean, Heather?
Just his general attitude. He thinks he's better and above, and his scary voice or whatever he wants to use.
He probably could have been a member of the Sex Pistols.
I don't know what that means.
I mean, he was just
Did you think that,
anarchy.
Heather?
No, I didn't get that at all.
Oh, you
I
didn't
don't
get
know
Sex
what the hell
Pistols.
that means.
But you didn't. So your core thought about Tiyotami is that he doesn't respect anything. He doesn't admire death, even though he's an agent of death in a way.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, my impression is he's like overconfident and can't be touched.
So, okay, then what about death? The character of death, the personification of death. In Pratchett's world, he's shaped like a human. He's a skeleton. He's a walking skeleton. He's got a scythe. Apparently, he's got a sword too. For some reason, he's got a granddaughter, which I think is explored a little bit more in another book called Mort. He talks with small capital letters, telepathically, essentially. He's got a manservant named Albert. Incidentally, I learned that Albert was a former Arch-Chancellor of the Unseen University who tried to cheat death 2,000 years previously. But that's not relevant to this story. Now, I think you did say that Death was one of your favorite characters.
He is my favorite character, yes.
The favorite characters for you. Why?
Yeah. Give me a minute. He's,
I mean, I've seen him described as he has an inability to understand the normal realities. He takes things very literally.
He's very literal. I appreciate that, and Rick hates that, but I like it. Just for the same reason he hated Susan's character, I appreciated
I don't
that.
hate things.
Yes, you did. You said, "Who is this bitch?" Yeah, you did. So
It's not hating. It's
yes,
just being annoyed.
You hated her on several occasions, and yeah, whatever. But I'm talking. Yes, Death is very literal, and
You liked that.
Yes, I do. I appreciate that. And he gets things done the same way that Susan just gets things done. She doesn't worry about, what's going on over here, what's going on. She's very focused, and
True.
I appreciate that. Get down to business and get it done. That's what I think.
And Death, he has limitations. He can't. There's some things he can't do, but he sort of sets Susan up to take care of things he thinks that she can do. Mm-hmm. And without actually telling her exactly, she just goes on and does it. She's proactive.
Yes.
Rick, why did you like these characters less, or whatever?
Why did I hate these characters?
Or hate them?
I don't dislike the concept of death. I think he's portrayed actually fairly well, fairly accurate.
It's an accurate portrayal of death.
Yeah,
Andy has a sense of humor, which is always fun.
he does have.
That's
a sense
what
of
you need
humor.
in your death, is a sense of humor.
Yeah, I think Pratchett said that death is like, or in this, not maybe it wasn't Pratchett, it was one of these documentaries about Hogfather. They said death is your last friend.
I really appreciate Death because he is no stranger to metaphysical concepts. He's educational. What was annoying about Susan was that she was just a bore, and I couldn't understand how she was able to sort of navigate through the story with such confidence and without any kind of error. Sure, she's related to Death, but not by blood.
Does he have blood? He's a skeleton.
Somehow she just has this innate ability to conquer fear with extreme confidence And it's like, well, where did this woman come from? I mean,
she doesn't need to fear. She can walk through walls and...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we don't get her full backstory, which I think is explored in another book, but like Heather pointed out, I mean, in this book, we see her right off the get-go defeating monsters. I mean, right in the beginning. She's taking her poker, her weapon of choice, and she's taking care of monsters for the kids who she's a governess of. She's like a Mary Poppins on steroids.
Right.
Yeah, right. To me, she's sort of like the real antagonist to the story because she starts off...
She's
the antagonist because the moral of the story is you have to believe in the little lies in order to believe in the big lies. Well, she never wanted to believe in the little lies. She shunned the little lies, and she minimalized the boogeyman. She minimalized the monsters for the kids. She told the kids that these things are
believes
real.
them.
She knows they're real, but she chose to ignore them, and she chose to not pass along the legacy of myth-making and storytelling to the kids.
Well, is it familiar reasons? Like, she wants to have a normal life. That's what I got from her.
Yeah, she wants to have a normal life. She wants to be normal. She was being selfish. She wasn't trying... Yes. So I think she was the antagonist because she was going against the theme of the book. And then she turned into a believer at the end.
I didn't see that. I just saw her... I didn't see that. I saw her as a reluctant hero.
Of course, yeah.
Well, Heather, what about you?
Yes, I agree. I don't agree with Rick, but yeah, she knew there was a job to be done and a problem to be solved, and she went ahead and did it. And she did it powerfully and forcefully, and
even despite her own personal misgivings or...
And she didn't want to use her powers and all that stuff, but she ended up doing it because it was the right thing to do, and that's what she did.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, Rick.
Dyed-in-the-wool hero. There was nothing interesting about the character.
He hated her.
I was just bored with her. She was not entertaining. I'm sorry.
Okay. Oh. Who was your favorite character?
I mean, it was probably the banter with all of the thieves that Tia Taime had employed and all of their fears. That was sort of my favorite exchange. I didn't really have a favorite character. Tia Taime was entertaining, but he was just a creep. He kind of...
he's the antagonist.
He is the antagonist, but he's also part of the myth, right? He wasn't really real. The only real people...
Well, what do you mean he's not real?
The moral of the story was Death and Susan, and it was Susan who was the non-believer, and Death who kind of knew what to do the entire time and had this lesson to teach and had a legacy to continue. And Susan from the beginning resisted, and then she realized, what the arc of events, what Death had in store the entire time. She finally realized that, I believe, at the end of the story, and I can't quote anything, but I always love the interchange.
Well, it's that quote we were talking about. The quote about the little lies and the big lies. Yeah, that's where that comes at the end.
But with Pratchett, I always really kind of hold the lower classes near and dear to my heart. Especially, my favorite part was where the beggars who are so low they're not even part of the Beggars Guild run into
the Beggars Guild,
a restaurant. Okay, where they exchange all of the meals that they've been saving up for Hogswatch, which consisted of prime roasted mud and shoe leather. They exchanged all of that for some prepared dinner that was available at a restaurant, and so they took the dinner and the meals that the restaurant had prepared, and they left all the shoes in mud.
I thought that they...
that was my favorite part. It's
I thought that they got the shoes in mud because the restaurant was making the shoes in mud because...
No. They had saved up the shoes in mud for Hogswatch. They were going to have their own feast from sort of the year's plunder where, they lived under the bridge by the river.
Yeah. But
right? So they had to get rid of their annual savings of the feast and exchange it for a real Hogswatch meal, which consisted of, roast pig and all of the trimmings.
I thought the restaurant, something was wrong with the restaurant. And
So
they were resorting to mud and
the scene in the
boot
restaurant
leather.
was the chef basically doctoring up shoes and mud and giving a French name to everything.
Yeah,
and making it cuisine for the restaurant patrons. And
Right, yeah.
I mean, it was just I love that about Pratchett. And it never made the movie, and it just was extremely disappointing. But whatever.
Yeah, well, we talk about belief being important. That comes down to the Hogfather, who's essentially Santa Claus, who's an interesting character because I heard Pratchett describe him as a basic winter demiurge who's been around since the beginning of time, and in the early iterations of him involved blood on the snow and making the sun come up. And I think the quotes about that was, "It's all about the sun, I think Albert says, "It's all about the sun, master. White snow and red blood and the sun, always has been." And there's a narrator who says, "It was sometime after its creation when most people forgot that the very oldest stories of the beginning are, sooner or later, about blood. At least that's one theory the philosopher Dialecticus suggested. An alternative hypothesis. Things just happen. What the hell?" A little bit of humor there, but the Hogfather is essentially a winter god who was like a hog in the beginning and then became like sort of like a man in a loincloth and all that. And in the end, you see him, once they're looking at him, you see the various phases he's gone through before he becomes the jolly old man that he becomes later at this point. And I thought that was very interesting, showing like the evolution of beliefs. And Death essentially says, we can't let them suppress the Hogfather or kill him. They can't really be killed. They can only be like suppressed by non-belief. Because if we let that happen and people don't believe in the Hogfather anymore, then the sun won't come up. And that's what Susan questions him on. She's like, "What do you mean the sun won't come up?" And he's like, "The sun won't come up." And when she presses him, she's like, "Well, what'll happen if the Hogfather no longer exists?" And he's like, "Then just a gassy ball will exist and come up in the sky and not the sun." Mm-hmm. And I think she finally understands that humans, to be humans, need it to be the sun and not a gassy ball of light.
Yes.
What?
Well, Heather, you're agreeing with me.
Yes, that's what the book said.
Well, did that speak to you at all, or no? And
no,
in a deeper way?
Not really. I mean,
no.
Something comes up in the morning. He didn't explain why it had to be belief in the Hogfather, why the sun had to come up. Like, who cares if it's the sun or if it's a gassy ball of light? It's the same thing.
Well, I
don't care.
I mean, okay, Heather, one of these days, you're just going to have to take a lesson in allegory.
Oh.
There's a lot of symbology here.
Oh, listen to Rick mansplain allegory to you.
Oh, okay.
The sun coming up represents the time and space it took the humans to come to the point of this sophisticated imagination to develop. All right. I think that's,
I mean, to me, it's what I was saying before, that we as humans, in order to form a society, an ordered structured society that functions in a positive way, we have to have belief systems. And so this is like the foundation of our belief systems, and that these fantasies, if you want to call them that, are necessary for society. And it's necessary that we believe them. It's not frivolous. Yes, of course, there'll be a gassy ball that exists in the sky, but as humans, we need to believe it's the sun. And the sun can be attributed with poems and all kinds of things and have meaning in our life beyond just being this gassy ball that's like pure rationalism, which is, I think, what the auditors want.
Right. The auditors want it to be seen as a gassy ball, correct?
Yeah.
So call the gassy ball the sun and be done with it. I don't care.
But it's
what's the difference?
I guess by calling it the sun, you almost like create something more nuanced, more multifaceted, more. You can attribute symbolism to it, and from there you can build on a society, and like he talks about having justice and mercy and these things we can agree on that are necessary for us to coexist and function together. Like I think that's what his point is. Like, we all want justice, but what the hell is justice? So you say like the sun is just a gassy ball. Well, yeah, it is just a gassy ball, but it's also the sun, and the sun can be symbolic to us and have meaning besides just being that. And we need these non-tangible things to function as a society.
So pick something else to be your sun.
I mean, the sun is what the ancient Greeks romanticized and designated a god for. You know, there's stories behind the sun, and it's kind of like the
stories, right?
But anyway, there are great anecdotes of justice in a lot of his stories, and mercy as well. But you know, I think this is kind of like what Terry Pratchett sort of writes for. He's a humanist. He believes in these virtues. I don't agree with him. I don't agree with him that they're big lies. I think they're something that an intelligent life form can recognize as being a real thing, because we're all pretty much the same. There's equity in being a human in a society.
Well, I think he would agree with that. I think he's saying lies tongue-in-cheek, sort of, you know.
Right. But, yeah. Anyway.
I mean, I find it fascinating, his viewpoint. I mean, it makes sense, and I just really like it. Another interesting little thing about that is that an important but like sort of subtle role is the character of Hex, the computer, sort of plays an important function, because at some point after going through these misadventures with the wizards, the Death confronts the computer and asks the computer if he believes, he or she or it believes in the Hogfather, and the computer says yes, and Death urges the computer to keep believing in the Hogfather. And it's almost like the computer replaces the lack of belief that was there because the children's belief was gone because it was being held hostage by Tia-Time.
Mm-hmm.
So he has like an artificial machine believing in the Hogfather, and that helps, you know, sustain the belief and strengthen it. I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting commentary. I don't know what it means, except maybe everything.
I think it just means, you know, the fanciful perspective of the Hogfather and how he is real is so forceful and powerful that they've actually made a computer believe in him, you know, on its own, right? It was just a joke. But Terry's point is, it is that powerful, and you should be able to convince a cold computer that's sophisticated enough to believe in that stuff, because the imagination is just that powerful. You can create realities from imagination. You know, when people use their imagination for, you know, good or bad things, you know, you hear the term self-fulfilling prophecy, right? People pave their own paths just with the language they use. If you're negative and you can't have a good attitude around people that you consider colleagues, then you probably won't have a very prosperous future with that. You know, it's all about what you believe, and it's like your belief system sort of creates your trajected reality. Okay, that's how powerful the imagination is. And
well, Albert gets into
the attitude.
He gets into like the socioeconomic aspect of gift giving. He talks about people getting appropriate presents and hoping, a big part of belief. He kind of explores classism a little bit there, and I don't know. It's all interesting commentary that Pratchett goes through.
Yeah, I you know, the mechanisms that Terry Pratchett uses are just like so schizophrenic, though, and I had just trouble throughout the story following along. I mean, the whole piling up of Tooth Fairy teeth. I mean, what was that? You know, like what is Tia-Time trying to do with all these teeth? Now, you don't really. It's not explicitly explained.
I think it is. I mean,
I suppose it is, but there's so much going on. It's almost like it just gets lost.
Well, I think Tia-Time figured out that the Hogfather, you can't kill him because he's sort of a deity, but you can suppress him to the point of non-existence if you get people to not believe in him. And who believes in the Hogfather? Not the parents, which is demonstrated in the beginning of the story, because they don't even believe in the boogeyman. It's the children. Right. And so they talk about in the beginning, there's an old form of magic which requires that you have a physical part of a person, like toenail clippings or hair or teeth, and then if you do that, if you have that, you can control people. And so Tia-Time has the, I guess, right theory that if he has all the teeth of the children in the world and he controls the teeth, that he can then influence the children to not believe in the Hogfather. So he goes to the Tooth Fairy castle where all these teeth are stored and gets access to them, and then does a simple old school magic on them that forces the children not to believe, and that causes the Hogfather to fade away to almost non-existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that I think I just realized after watching the movie and just sort of like having it integrated with what I already knew from the book.
Yeah.
But I just I guess I didn't catch on right away with that. It was like a little bit too far-fetched.
I can see that. Sometimes I find, too, that some of the nuances of books get lost on me, and then when I see the visual medium, it like becomes clearer.
Right.
Yeah. I can see that. And definitely now having read and watched it now, everything's like clear to me. So, well, we've been talking for a while now. I wouldn't, I was thinking about wrapping things up here. We can get into more aspects in the movie episode. That sounds good to you.
I want to ask this question though.
Okay, sure.
And I guess it could be shelved until the next episode. So I guess we'll wait.
Do you want to ask it as a sort of teaser for the next episode?
Well, I mean, you had mentioned that you had seen the movie before you read the book, and it perked your interest. Now, if you just saw this movie completely cold without reading the book, I'm wondering how you would have any desire to read the book, just because I don't think the movie would make any sense to anybody.
Well, all right, that's a good teaser. We'll save that for our next episode.
Okay.
All right, but let's close things out here and give our final comments on star ratings. Heather, we haven't heard anything from you in a little bit.
Right.
What's like your closing comments about the book? And out of 5 stars, how many would you give it?
It's typical for his Discworld series, so it's he can have 5 stars. That's fine.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice, Rick.
That's fine.
Out of 5, how many would you give it?
I thought it was a pretty significant book in the genre. I'll give it 5 stars too.
Whoa.
Yeah.
The Mel's coming at it with double 5s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to triple down on that, and I'm also going to give it a 5-star, which is, I think, we gave Going Postal 5 stars, and I would consider this with Going Postal. Like, this is a great book on its own. It's a great Discworld book, and I really like it. So I'd also give 5 stars and recommend to anyone to check it out. And like a lot of the Discworld books, I don't really think you need to read any of the other ones to understand this one.
No.
I think you can just get right into it. You don't need to know these characters' backstories or anything.
Not at all.
Or what happens to him later. And that's kind of how he designed the series. All right. So I will invite people to go to our website, www.nodeodorant.com, and also to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or TuneIn Radio. We also have a YouTube feed, a Facebook page. We're on Stitcher Radio, just pretty much all the places you can find podcasts. So please write a review, subscribe to our podcast, and tune in later in the month when we discuss the film version of this. Until then, we'll say good night. Good night, everyone.
Have a nice evening.
Good night.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode, or to read our show notes and find us on social media, visit nodeodorant.com. For more information on Ryan Sean O'Reilly and his various works of fiction, visit ryanseanoreilly.com. The theme music for this podcast was written by John Doyle from the band I Decline. You can visit him at i-decline.com. Voiceover for this podcast was provided by me, Margaret O'Reilly. Well, that concludes our episode. We hope you've learned a lot. Again, thanks for listening to our show. And always, always remember, there is no deodorant in outer space.
Blah, blah.
Yeah, that's better. That's
blah.
it. That's it.
Blah, 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 blah. Blah. Well, I'll be louder.
All right, everyone is settled.
Yep.
All right, Heather. Just to have that. Hey, what's that noise? What are you guys doing
It's
right
me.
now?
I'm adjusting my table in my space.
Oh, okay.
Chicken out.
No, I just want to make sure you can hear that because I can totally hear it.
Yes, I can hear it. It's very annoying.
Okay.
But I need my space.
So we'll save it, we'll close it out, we'll open a new file, but you'll upload it after we're done.
That sounds like an excellent plan.
Okay. Is there any way you can upload it for us?
This is just like the old days. What's your relationship to science fiction and fantasy and horror?
I have none, though.
No, I mean, you've read Harry Potter, you've read other Discworld books. I mean,
you're
right there.
Tell us how many iterations you've been through the Harry Potter series.
Oh, no, that's embarrassing. I can't say that.
Okay, everyone just relax. All right, ready?
Yeah.
Okay, in 5,
Shit.
in 4,
I hate this.
in 3, in 2, in 1.
This.
Rick, are you typing or
Ryan's
something?
getting distracted by the
You can whatever you're doing.
sounds.
Whatever you were just doing, you can't do. It's totally getting picked up by the microphone.
Yeah, we don't have our microphone like on a pillow right now. It's just
Should we
on
put
a
it on a
table,
pillow?
and every time we kind of move around, it creaks. So
But I'm guessing that table's really sensitive because it's pounding like crazy.
Heather's putting her handkerchief under the microphone.
The table is sensitive, and it doesn't like
Yeah.
it when you talk about it.
That's probably a little bit better.
I can still hear it, but
Yeah, it's still pretty good. Were you just typing, Rick?
no.
Oh, okay. Whatever you were doing,
It was
though,
the ghost. The
I
ghost
like
was
to avoid
typing.
typing at all costs.
Okay.
I'm gonna refill.
Oh my God, Heather, you gotta slow down.
No, I don't.
Did
White shorts.
You spilled the whole beer on yourself?
No, not the whole beer, just a little bit. But I'm wearing new
Your new
short.
silk underwear.
All right, are we all set again? Sorry about that. As
Okay.
Heather hacks up along. Okay.
Shut up,
fuckers. All right, Rick. Now let's not screw this part up. So
Uh-oh.
let's all hit stop.
Was the computer supposed to be on?